Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Thrilling Thursdays. I'm Callie Ryder.
And I'm Sophie Gillis, and if you remember from last week's episode, we discussed the myth of Peggy's Cove in Nova Scotia. But this week we will be discussing something a little more local to us.
Yeah, actually, it's only about 45 minutes away from here where we're filming in Quispamsis.
Yeah, so we're actually talking about St. Andrews, and St. Andrews is said to be one of New Brunswick's most haunted towns. There have been many reported sightings of ghost sailors roaming the shores at midnight, and many also say that the old jailhouse is haunted by convicted felons who died there. But today we will be focusing on the main attraction, which is the Algonquin Hotel.
Yeah, and like some of those places you mentioned, the Algonquin itself is pretty old. It was actually built way back in 1889, so even before the Titanic.
Yeah, so I actually visited the Algonquin back in the summer, and it's very gorgeous. It's Victorian style, it has 233 rooms, 4 floors, but aside from all that, it is famous for all of its ghost stories.
Well, I hope you didn't run into any of them while you were there.
Well, I'm glad to say that I didn't.
But actually, it wasn't always famous for its ghosts. Back when it was first built, it was actually famous for saltwater baths, believe it or not.
Oh, so can you tell me more about those saltwater baths? I didn't happen to encounter any when I was there in the summer.
Yeah, so those have been gone for a long time, actually. But when it first opened up, what they would do is they would pump in water from the bay, and each room actually had 2 taps. One would be for regular water, and one would be for salt water. A lot of people would take them, come in from the city and visit the hotel. They thought that, it could help with stress, it could help with pain. None of that was ever proved, of course, though. But today we're not going to be talking about their baths. We're going to be talking about their ghosts.
Yeah, so some of the most well-known ghost stories involve a ghost bride who never moved on, a little boy who still wanders the halls, and a friendly bellman.
Ooh, sounds spooky. First up is the story of our ghost bride. Like any love story, it started with a young couple in love. The man was a sailor who was often out at sea, and their wedding was scheduled to be at the Algonquin the day after he sailed back into St. Andrews. The bride was already in town and was preparing for their wedding, but she was blissfully unaware of a storm that was out at sea.
On the day of their wedding, her fiancé was still caught in the thrashing waves of the storm with no way to tell his fiancée that he would be late to their wedding. Alone at the altar, the bride believed that he had left her. She then ran and locked herself in the honeymoon suite, room 473.
Seeing that she was unconsolable, her family and friends left her alone for the night. However, in the morning, they found her dead in her room. By the time her fiancé came ashore the next day, there was nothing that could be done. Some say that she died of suicide, but others say that it was her broken heart that killed her. But anyone who has stayed there since would all agree that she never left.
Since that night, people in surrounding rooms have reported hearing a woman sobbing uncontrollably in the bridal suite. Many times, the front desk has been left confused as there is never anyone checked into room 473 when people report it. Some have even seen the young woman in her white gown staring out the window at the end of the hall, looking out at the bay and waiting for her fiancé to come back.
This chilling tale is believed by many of the hotel staff, who have received dead calls in the middle of the night from the vacant room 473. And maybe you would believe it too, if you had heard her ghastly cries.
So the thing about this ghost story that I find most hard to believe is that there's no actual recorded cause of death for the bride. Obviously there is the speculated suicide, or that she died of the broken heart, like the romantics would like to say. But it's just, I find it very weird that there's not a 100% accurate cause of death that was investigated. So yeah, I don't know what to believe about that.
Yeah, and I guess it makes sense that records like that wouldn't be accessible to the public, but it's still kind of iffy that because it's one of their major attractions, they don't have that for sure, like on the internet, on their website. Anywhere we looked, we couldn't find like a website or a book that could agree on what the cause of death is. All of these stories are kind of contradicting each other, but also there wasn't a specific date, or the bride didn't have a name. Everyone calls her the jilted bride, the weeping wife. Like, she has all these names, but not an actual name. And the first very detailed sighting of her, when they realized who it could be, was in 1924. But before that, we don't really know like a specific date of when this wedding happened, when she died. So that would probably be what makes me the most skeptical. Today's podcast is sponsored by Detectives R Us, supporting the curious minds of today's youth.
Get your murder mystery kit from Detectives R Us in McAllister Place, St. John. Murder mystery kit includes magnifying glass, detective badge, fingerprint identifier, and DNA sampling kit. This kit retails at $29.99. Items not sold separately. So now that we have told you all about the hysterical bride who haunts room 473 in the Algonquin, we are going to lighten things up with the story of the bellman.
So he's actually one of the fewer, friendlier ghosts that inhabit the Algonquin. And it's kind of nice, though, to realize that, some people actually stuck around the hotel because of all the good memories, the joyful ones that they experienced there, and not just because of bad ones or untimely deaths.
Yeah, and the fact that he couldn't bear to part with his hotel speaks to the greatness of the hotel itself and its hospitable environment.
So, this legend goes that he had been an employee there for quite some time and actually retired there. And although there isn't a whole lot of information on his death, we do know that it was a peaceful one, not some violent death like the bride's was. And he actually didn't die on the hotel grounds. And this probably contributes to the reason why his haunting isn't a vengeful one, but it's actually pretty helpful.
And since his death, the bellman will often appear when there's no actual living and employed bellman on duty. Guests checking in late at night will be treated to a history lesson on the hotel as well as the town, while being helped with their bags and greeted with overwhelming hospitality.
And it's only when the guests get to their room and set down their bags, usually they'll reach over to give him a tip, but they'll find that he's nowhere in sight. Guests claim that one minute they're talking to a man, and the next minute he's vanished. Those who are persistent enough to call the front desk will usually give his description and then learn that he actually hasn't been employed there for quite some time now.
And the employees at the Algonquin are surprised to learn that the mystery bellman perfectly matches the description of the bellman who passed away. This leads to many thinking that the bellman, who many people encounter at night, is in fact the ghost of the retired bellman who passed too soon and was not done helping people quite yet. So I'm just not sure if I believe this ghost story. I find it very hard to believe that someone could be talking to someone one minute and then disappear the next. It just sounds highly unlikely to me, but I guess anything is possible.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess it's not the fact that he disappears, because I guess in any ghost story that's kind of like the story you hear, but it's probably more like everyone who says that they've had an encounter with him say that he's helped them to their room, helped them with their bags.
Exactly,
Yeah, and I just don't know how, if he was actually a ghost or a specter of sorts, like how he could physically
help them.
Pick up their bags. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me, so that's just my 2 cents on it, I guess.
This episode is proudly sponsored by the producers of Long Island Medium.
Tune in to TLC Mondays at 7 and join Teresa Caputo, who has the power to communicate with spirits and works as a medium to help people connect with their loved ones who have since passed. Viewer discretion is advised and all rights are reserved. So, our last story for today is a little bit more tragic than the rest. It involves a little boy, which is pretty sad, and he met his end while on vacation, so it's not exactly for the faint of heart.
And back before the Algonquin burnt down and was rebuilt, they had large picture windows in the halls of the hotel. And it was at the time of the story that the building was undergoing some construction, so on some of the floors there were gaps where the windows should have been.
Like most little kids, he loved to play with all of his toys, but his favorite was a red ball. He was on vacation with his parents, and they were staying on the top floor of the hotel.
And the little boy had enjoyed exploring the hotel during his stay, but ultimately went back to playing with his ball. And it was during one of these times that his ball got away from him while he was in the hall outside of his room.
He chased it all the way to the end of the hall, and he was so focused on retrieving his ball that he didn't even notice how close he had come to the construction site. Right as he just reached his ball, he lost his footing and fell forward. Him and his beloved ball fell 4 stories to the ground.
To this day, people recall seeing a lone red ball rolling down the hall on the top floor, and others even say that they can hear a child's laughter followed by screaming. But when they run to check the hall, it's empty.
So I feel like part of the reason this story would make me skeptical one, I just don't want to believe it, you know? Like,
Exactly.
it's just kind of sad to think about.
Yeah, it's quite depressing actually that he was just so young and he, just wanted to play with his ball and then ended up, unfortunately, falling to his death.
Yeah, but then I guess also on the other hand, why would they make up something that tragic?
Exactly.
The other ones, they're adults, and I mean, sad to say, it's still tragic either way, but people don't feel as sympathetic towards adults, I guess, than you would if you hear of like a child dying. But yeah, and I mean, other than that, I guess there's just the regular points that make you skeptical. Where's the date? When did it happen? Other than we have that it happened before the fire, but...
Exactly, and, more specifics, like, even his name or, like, his family's surname.
Yeah, I totally understand. And other than ghost stories making the hotel a huge attraction, you'd wonder if some of these, if they would even be allowed to talk about them if they were real, If these were real tragic deaths, a little boy died, if that happened to me, I probably wouldn't want the hotel using it as a tourist attraction. Even if it was like 100 years ago, it would probably be seen more...
Very true, yeah.
Yeah, less of like an attraction, more of like a cautionary tale, or maybe a memorial in the hotel for people who died there. So I guess you really just kind of have to weigh it.
Yeah, and not only that, but I would assume the family might have taken some legal action against the hotel just because they probably should have had some warnings or even had those windows blocked off and secured so that something like this didn't happen. So it is quite unfortunate.
Yeah.
So after taking a step back into the past and discussing 3 of the most popular ghost stories, which are obviously the Tale of the Bride, the Friendly Bellman, and the unfortunate passing of the little boy and his red ball, and all of those take place right in the heart of St. Andrews at the Algonquin, which is only 4 to 5 minutes away from us. We just hope that you can see that not all ghosts are evil and scary, but some are better left alone and not to be messed with.
And since the both of us are just so passionate about all of this local history, scary ghost stories, real or not real, depending on what you believe, the legends and myths, we just love sharing our passion with all of you listeners, and we really appreciate you tuning in every week. We hope that you can appreciate all of the great history of the Algonquin Hotel and all of the stories that go along with it.
And if you are brave enough, make sure to tune in next week to Thriller Thursdays, on Thursday of course, to hear all about the headless nun who wanders the riverside in Miramichi, New Brunswick.
Spooky, can't wait. But for now, we want to leave you with one last question to think about. If you were to find yourself at the Algonquin in the middle of the night, would you risk venturing out of your room alone? So we were just going to leave you off with that last question, but after listening back to our podcast recording, we noticed in the last little part what sounded like a dog or a child.
Or maybe even the little boy who died chasing after his red ball.
He might have come back to haunt us for talking about his story. Anyway, whatever it is, we don't know. We've been filming this alone, just the 2 of us, so I honestly have no idea what that was, but good spooky way to end off our podcast, I guess.
Exactly, so we hope to
Not see you, but hope you can hear us next week.